The 20th bride was still crying when her carriage disappeared into the blizzard. Caleb Granger stood in the doorway of his Montana fortress, watching another woman flee before sunset, and felt absolutely nothing. 20 women in 18 months, 20 humiliations, 20 failures who thought his money could buy what his heart refused to give. The ranch hands wouldn't meet his eyes anymore. The territory called him a monster. And the worst part? He didn't care, because caring had nearly destroyed him once. And Caleb Granger had sworn on frozen ground that he would never make that mistake again. Before we begin this story of pride, isolation, and the kind of love that breaks through stone walls, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to where it all started, in the brutal winter of 1887, when the coldest man in Montana was about to meet the only woman who could thaw him. The wind came down from the mountains like a living thing, hungry and mean, the kind of cold that turned spit to ice before it hit the ground. Caleb Granger stood on the porch of his ranch house, a structure so large and imposing it looked less like a home and more like a declaration of war against the wilderness. 3 stories of Montana timber and Colorado stone, windows that reflected nothing but sky and distance, and a silence so complete you could hear your own heartbeat echoing back at you. He was waiting for number 21. "Boss?" The voice came from behind him. Marcus Webb, his foreman for the past 6 years, a man who'd seen Caleb at his worst, and somehow stayed anyway. Marcus was holding a telegram, and his face had that particular expression that meant he was about to say something Caleb wouldn't like. "What?" "Telegram from Mrs. Hartford in Denver. Says the next candidate, Miss Elizabeth Thornton, won't be arriving after all." Caleb didn't turn around. "She back out?" "Her father did. Says he heard stories." "What kind of stories?" Marcus shifted his weight, boots creaking on the frozen porch boards, the kind where 20 women show up expecting a husband and leave before dinner. "Accurate stories, then." "Boss, maybe we should—" "We should what, Marcus?" Now Caleb did turn, and Marcus took an involuntary step back. Caleb Granger at 42 was not a handsome man in the classical sense, but he was the kind of man who made you forget about handsome. 6'3" of muscle and scar tissue, face weathered by Montana weather until it looked carved from the same stone as his house, eyes the color of a January sky, pale blue and merciless. "Should I what? Lower my standards? Pretend I'm looking for something I'm not? Lie to some desperate woman so she'll stick around long enough to realize what a mistake she made? I'm just saying maybe the problem isn't them." The silence that followed was so cold it made the Montana wind feel warm by comparison. "Get back to work," Caleb said quietly. Marcus left without another word. Smart man. Caleb stood alone on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the western peaks. The Granger Ranch sprawled across 12,000 acres of the most brutal, beautiful country on earth. Cattle dotted the frozen valleys like black stones. The barns were full. The accounts were healthy. He employed 43 men year-round, more during branding season. He was, by every measure that mattered in Montana Territory in 1887, a success. He was also completely alone, and that was exactly how he wanted it. The first bride had arrived in May of 1886. Her name was Catherine, and she'd come from Boston with 3 steamer trunks, a parasol completely useless against Montana sun, and the kind of smile that seemed practiced in front of mirrors. She'd been pretty in that polished way rich women had, where you couldn't quite tell if they were beautiful or if they'd just spent enough money to make you think so. "Mr. Granger," she'd said, extending a gloved hand like she expected him to kiss it. "What a magnificent estate." "It's a ranch," he'd replied, and watched her smile flicker. She'd lasted 4 hours. 4 hours of looking around his house, admittedly sparse, admittedly more functional than decorative, and asking increasingly pointed questions about whether he planned to build a proper residence in town, whether he planned to travel to San Francisco or perhaps back east for the season, whether he understood that a woman of her standing required certain accommodations. "What standing is that?" he'd asked. "I beg your pardon? You said a woman of your standing. What standing? Your father's money? Your mother's social connections? What exactly have you done that requires accommodation?" She'd stared at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. "I'm offering you a partnership," Caleb had continued, surprising himself with how angry he was getting. "A life here. A real life. Not a decoration for my house or a status symbol to parade around Denver social functions. If that's not enough, there's a stage leaving for Helena in the morning. You should be on it." She was on it. The second bride lasted 6 hours. The third made it through dinner, but not dessert. The fourth took one look at the ranch and didn't even get out of the carriage. By the 10th bride, the territorial newspapers had started running stories. "Montana's most eligible bachelor can't find a wife. The impossible Mr. Granger. What's wrong with Caleb Granger's brides?" By the 20th, the stories had changed tone. "The cruelest man in Montana. Caleb Granger's house of broken dreams. Is the cattle baron capable of love?" Caleb had read every single article, felt nothing, and used them to start fires. The problem, as Caleb saw it, wasn't him. The problem was that every single woman who showed up at his ranch arrived with the same fundamental misunderstanding. They thought they were owed something, owed romance, owed comfort, owed a version of him that didn't exist and never would. They didn't see a partner, they saw a bank account with a pulse. And Caleb had been that particular kind of fool once before. Once was enough. Her name had been Sarah. Even now, 11 years later, thinking about Sarah felt like touching a wound that had never quite healed right. She'd been everything those other women pretended to be. Smart, funny, genuine. At least he'd thought she was genuine. They'd met in Miles City when Caleb was still building the ranch, still sleeping in a line shack and working 20-hour days to turn raw land into something sustainable. Sarah had been a school teacher, and she'd looked at him like she saw something worth believing in. They'd planned a future together. Caleb had built the big house with her in mind, every room designed around the life they were going to share. He'd put in the extra windows she wanted. He'd ordered furniture from St. Louis. He'd even, and this still embarrassed him to remember, planted roses along the front walk because she'd mentioned once that her mother had loved roses. Then Jonathan Carmichael had rolled into Miles City with his railroad money and his East Coast sophistication, and Sarah had discovered that a half-built ranch in Montana wasn't quite as romantic as a mansion in Philadelphia. "You have to understand," she'd said the night she told him. They were in the partially finished house, surrounded by lumber and sawdust and the smell of fresh paint. "Jonathan can give me things you can't. Stability, culture, a real life." "This is a real life," Caleb had said, and hated how his voice cracked. "No, Caleb, this is a gamble, and I'm not brave enough to bet on it." She'd left on a Tuesday morning, married Carmichael 6 weeks later. Caleb had heard through mutual acquaintances that she was very happy in Philadelphia, attending theater and hosting dinner parties and doing all the things that apparently constituted a real life. He'd pulled out every rose bush that same afternoon, roots and all, and burned them. That was 11 years ago. 11 years of building the ranch into an empire. 11 years of proving Sarah wrong about it being a gamble. The ranch was now worth more than Carmichael's railroad stock, and everybody knew it. 11 years of telling himself he was better off alone. And if sometimes, late at night when the wind howled down from the peaks, Caleb lay awake in that big empty house and wondered if she'd been right about him being incapable of giving anyone a real life. Well, nobody needed to know that. Winter came early in 1887. By November, the territory was locked in ice. The cattle huddled in the valleys, fur thick against the cold. The ranch hands moved between barn and bunkhouse like men underwater, every action slowed by layers of wool and leather. Snow fell in sheets, then drifts, then walls that turned the landscape into something alien and impossible. Caleb worked alongside his men, because that was the kind of man he was. He didn't ask anyone to do something he wouldn't do himself. 16-hour days checking stock, breaking ice from water troughs, hauling feed through snowdrifts that came up to his chest. The other ranchers in the territory spent winters in Helena or even San Francisco, leaving their operations to foremen and coming back when the weather improved. Not Caleb. This was his land, his responsibility, his choice. "You're going to work yourself to death," Marcus said one night, both of them standing in the barn after a particularly brutal day. They'd lost 2 head to the cold, and Caleb had helped dig the frozen carcasses out of a ravine personally. "Then I'll die working," Caleb replied, not looking up from the harness he was mending. "That what you want? That how this ends?" "How what ends?" Marcus gestured around the barn, at the ranch beyond. "All this. You build an empire and then what? Leave it to who? You got no wife, no kids, no family, except a brother you haven't spoken to in 5 years? You just gonna work until your heart stops and let the territory auction it off? Caleb's hands stilled on the leather. You got something you want to say? Say it. I'm saying you're 42 years old and you're living like a man with nothing to lose. And maybe that worked when you were building this place, but now you built it. It's done. And you're still acting like you're at war. I am at war. With who? Everyone who wants something from me I can't give. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, then, or won't. Caleb looked up sharply, but Marcus was already walking away, boots echoing on the frozen ground. The storm hit on the 15th of November. The kind of storm old-timers talked about in hushed voices, the kind that killed cattle by the hundreds and turned the mountains into a white hell. The temperature dropped 30 degrees in 4 hours. The wind screamed like something dying. Snow fell so thick you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Caleb and his men worked through the first night, getting every animal they could find into shelter, boarding up buildings, tying guide ropes between structures so nobody would get lost in the whiteout. By dawn, the ranch looked like something from a nightmare. Snow drifted 15 feet high against the barn, ice coating everything like armor, the world reduced to nothing but white and cold and wind. Everyone accounted for? Caleb shouted over the storm. Marcus checked his list, snow already accumulating on the paper. All present. Then we're done until this passes. Nobody goes out for any reason. They retreated to the bunkhouse, 43 men and Caleb crammed into a space designed for 30, the stove working overtime to keep the temperature above freezing. The men played cards, told stories, slept in shifts. Caleb sat by the window, watching the storm rage, and tried not to think about how much stock they were losing with every hour that passed. The storm lasted 3 days. On the third day, just as the wind was finally starting to die, one of the younger hands, a kid named Tommy, who'd hired on in September, came running from the direction of the main gate. Boss, you gotta come quick! Caleb was on his feet before Tommy finished speaking. What happened? There's someone at the gate, a rider. In this? Marcus was already pulling on his coat. That's suicide. They ran through snow that came up to their knees, the wind still strong enough to make every step a fight. The main gate was a quarter-mile from the house, an ornate structure Caleb had built more for intimidation than function, a message to everyone approaching that they were entering his territory. Slumped against the gate, half buried in snow, was a horse, and slumped on the horse was a woman. Christ, Marcus breathed. Caleb was already moving, wading through the drift, reaching for the figure. She was frozen to the saddle, literally frozen. Ice had formed on her coat, her hair, her exposed skin. He couldn't tell if she was breathing. Get her to the house, he shouted. Tommy, take care of the horse. Marcus, get the doctor. Doctor's in town, boss. No way he can get through this. Then get whoever knows first aid. Move. Caleb carried her himself, this frozen stranger who'd somehow ridden through hell to collapse at his gate. She was lighter than she should be, like she hadn't been eating right. Her clothes were worn, patched in places, nothing like the fine fabrics the other brides had worn. No jewelry, no adornment, just functional wool and leather, and not enough of either. He kicked open the door to the main house, the house he'd built for Sarah and now lived in alone like a monument to his own stupidity, and carried the woman to the fire. Her face was blue-white, lips almost purple. Frost had formed in her eyelashes. Is she alive? Tommy asked, hovering in the doorway. Caleb pressed 2 fingers to her neck, searching for a pulse. For a long moment, he felt nothing. Then, there, faint but steady. Barely. Get me blankets, hot water, and find someone who knows what they're doing with frostbite. The next hour was chaos. The men brought supplies, offered advice, hovered uselessly until Caleb ordered them all out except Marcus. Together they worked to warm her slowly. Too fast and they'd kill her. Off came the frozen coat, the boots, the gloves. Her fingers were white, possibly frostbitten. Her feet were worse. Who is she? Marcus asked, wrapping another blanket around the still unconscious woman. No idea. Check her coat. Maybe there's identification. Marcus searched the pockets and found nothing except a small leather pouch containing maybe $3 in coins and a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it carefully. It's a letter, he said. Addressed to you. Caleb took it. The handwriting was unfamiliar, shaky from cold or emotion, or both. Mr. Granger, my name is Clara Bennett. I am writing to request shelter for the winter. I am not seeking marriage or charity. I can work for my keep. I have experience with accounts, cooking, and general ranch management from my late husband's property in Wyoming. I am willing to accept any arrangement you consider fair. I understand you have rejected numerous women seeking your hand. I want you to know I am not one of them. I am simply a widow seeking refuge from circumstances that have become untenable. If you are willing to consider this request, I will be arriving around November 15th, weather permitting. I ask for nothing beyond honest work and safe shelter. Respectfully, Clara Bennett. Caleb read the letter twice, then a third time. She's not a bride, he said quietly. What? She's not another damn bride. She's asking for a job. He looked down at the unconscious woman, Clara Bennett, and for the first time in months felt something other than anger or emptiness. He felt curious. Clara woke up 36 hours later. Caleb was sitting in the chair by the bed because he'd been sitting in the chair by the bed in shifts with Marcus for the entire time, monitoring her condition. He'd seen her eyelids flutter, watched consciousness return in stages, and when she finally opened her eyes, brown, he noted, dark brown like creek stones, the first thing she said was, "I'm sorry." Not, "Where am I?" or "What happened?" Just, "I'm sorry." For what? Caleb asked. She blinked, trying to focus. For the trouble. I should have stopped when the storm hit, should have found shelter, should have... You rode through a blizzard that killed a dozen head of my cattle. Where exactly were you planning to find shelter? She was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, your cattle. I'm on the Granger Ranch? You are. Then I made it. She closed her eyes, and something that might have been a smile crossed her face. I wasn't sure. Caleb studied her. She was maybe 30, maybe younger. Hard to tell when someone had been through what she'd been through. Brown hair, currently tangled and matted from 3 days in bed. Thin face, sharp cheekbones, the kind of features that would be striking on someone well-fed, but just looked gaunt on her. Small frame, work-roughened hands, calluses he could see even from the chair. This was not a woman who'd spent her life being taken care of. You wrote me a letter, he said. I did. Asking for work. Yes. Not marriage. Definitely not marriage. She opened her eyes again, met his directly. No offense, Mr. Granger, but I've had one husband. That was more than enough. Something in Caleb's chest did a strange little flip. He ignored it. You said circumstances became untenable. What circumstances? Clara was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but carefully empty of emotion. My husband died 2 years ago. Left the ranch to his brother. The brother sold it. I had nowhere to go. Family? Dead, or might as well be. Friends? Turns out friends are easier to find when you have money to lend them. Caleb knew that particular truth personally. So you decided to ride into Montana in November. I decided, Clara said slowly, that anywhere was better than Wyoming with winter coming and no prospects. I heard you were looking for wives. Figured even if you weren't interested in marriage, a ranch this size probably needed workers. I got 43 hands already. How many of them can do your accounts? Marcus handles the books. How many of them can cook something that isn't beans and salt pork? We got a cook. How many of them, Clara said, voice sharpening slightly, are willing to work for nothing except room and board until they can afford passage somewhere else? Caleb sat back. You're negotiating from a sickbed. I'm clarifying my value proposition. There's a difference. Despite everything, the situation, the absurdity, the sheer brass balls on this half-frozen widow, Caleb laughed. Actually laughed. He couldn't remember the last time he'd done that. You got frostbite on 3 fingers and both feet, he said. Doc says you'll probably keep the fingers, but you're going to lose at least 2 toes. You rode through a storm that killed experienced cattlemen, and you're lucky to be alive. And you're lying there negotiating employment terms. Would you prefer I cry and beg for charity? No, Caleb said honestly. No, I wouldn't. Clara nodded, like that settled something. So, do I have a job? You can't even stand. I will be able to. Not for weeks. Then I'll work sitting down. Your books probably need attention anyway. When's the last time you balanced them? Caleb had to think about it. June? It's November. I've been busy. Then you need me. She said it simply, like it was fact. Not arrogant, just true. And the thing was, Caleb realized, she was probably right. 1 month, he said. Trial basis. You do the books, help with cooking if you're able, make yourself useful. Room and board, no wages. After a month, we reassess. That's fair. I don't want your life story. I don't want to hear about your tragic past or your dead husband or whatever brought you here. You do your work, I do mine. We stay out of each other's way. Understand? Something flickered in Clara's eyes. Hurt, maybe, or recognition. Perfectly. Good. Caleb stood, suddenly uncomfortable with how long he'd been sitting there. Marcus will bring you food. Doctor will check on you tomorrow. You need anything? Tell one of the hands. He was at the door when she spoke again. Mr. Granger? He stopped but didn't turn around. Thank you, Clara said quietly, for not letting me die at your gate. You're welcome, Caleb replied, and left before he could say anything else. The next 2 weeks were strange. Clara stayed in the guest room, a room that had never actually had a guest until now, and recovered. Slowly. The doctor confirmed what Caleb had suspected. She'd lose the 2 smallest toes on her left foot, frostbite damage too severe to save. She took the news with the same calm practicality she seemed to approach everything, just nodded and asked when she could start walking again. Week or 2, the doctor said. And even then, careful. She was walking in 5 days. Caleb would see her sometimes, limping through the house with grim determination, using furniture for support. He didn't offer help. She didn't ask for it, but he noticed she was always up before dawn, always working on something even when she should have been resting. True to her word, she started on the books. Caleb came into the office one morning to find her surrounded by ledgers, papers spread across the desk like a war map, making notes in handwriting so precise it looked printed. You're supposed to be recovering, he said. I'm sitting down. You said I could work sitting down. She didn't look up. When's the last time you reconciled your cattle count with your sales receipts? I don't know. Marcus, Clara interrupted, still not looking up, has been covering losses that don't match up. You're short about 40 head based on these numbers. Caleb felt his jaw tighten. Marcus wouldn't steal from me. I didn't say he was stealing. I said the numbers don't match. Could be winter loss. Could be accounting error. Could be somebody else stealing and Marcus didn't notice. But the numbers don't match. She finally looked up, met his eyes. You want me to pretend I didn't see it? No, Caleb said slowly. No, I want you to find out what happened. Then I need to talk to Marcus, and I need access to the rest of your financial records. All of them? All of them. Caleb studied her. Clara Bennett, widow from Wyoming, half-starved and missing 2 toes, and currently living in his house on Charity she refused to call Charity. Looking at him with absolute confidence that she could unravel whatever mess his books had become. They're in the safe, he said. I'll get them for you. Thank you. He brought her the records, all of them. 5 years of accounts, purchases, sales, payroll. She spread them across every available surface and disappeared into them like a woman diving into water. 3 days later, she had answers. It's not theft, she said, calling Caleb into the office. It's incompetence. Look here. She walked him through it. Marcus had been recording sales wrong, counting the same cattle twice in some cases, missing them entirely in others. Not malicious, just sloppy. And over 5 years, sloppy had added up to significant discrepancies. How much? Caleb asked. Best estimate? You're actually up about 60 head from what you thought. Marcus has been undercounting. Caleb sat down heavily. So I'm richer than I thought, modestly. The bigger problem is you can't trust any of these numbers. I need to do a full audit, cross-reference everything, rebuild your accounts from scratch. How long will that take? Months, if you let me do it right. Caleb looked at her. Really looked at her. Clara was wearing one of the spare dresses they'd found in storage, too big for her thin frame, her hair pulled back in a practical bun. She looked exhausted. She also looked more alive than she had when she'd arrived. All right, he said. Do it right. You're sure it's going to be a lot of work? and it means I'll be here longer than a month. Yeah, Caleb said. I'm sure. Something passed between them in that moment. Not attraction exactly, more like recognition. Two people who understood what it meant to work until everything else fell away. Clara smiled, small but real. Then I better get started. Winter deepened. The ranch became an island in a sea of white, isolated from the rest of the territory by snow and cold and distance. Supply runs to town became impossible. The men settled into the long wait until spring, playing cards and mending equipment and slowly going stir-crazy. Caleb worked, same as always. But now, when he came back to the house at night, there was light in the office window. Clara bent over the book, scratching numbers with the kind of focus he recognized because he saw it in himself. They started having dinner together, not planned, just practical. Clara actually cooked, not the basic survival meals Caleb had been living on, and it seemed wasteful for her to eat alone when he was there anyway. So they ate together, and eating together led to talking. "Where'd you learn to cook like this?" Caleb asked one night, working through what Clara called beef stew, but tasted like something a restaurant would serve. "My mother," Clara said. "She believed women should know how to do things, not just manage a household, actually do them." Smart woman. She was. Clara paused. "She died when I was 16. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. She wouldn't want pity." Clara looked at him directly. "Where'd you learn to build all this?" Caleb gestured vaguely at the house, the ranch beyond. "Trial and error mostly. My father was a farmer in Ohio, failed farmer, drank himself to death when I was 20. I came west because there was nothing keeping me there." "No other family?" "A brother, Robert. He stayed, tried to make the farm work. Last I heard, he succeeded." "You don't talk to him?" "No." "Why not?" Caleb put down his fork. "Because he married the girl I was supposed to marry, and even though that was 20 years ago and I don't care about her anymore, some things you don't forgive." Clara was quiet for a moment. Then, "Your brother married your fiancée?" "Not exactly. We weren't engaged yet. But everyone knew I was going to ask her. Then my father died. I left for Montana, and 6 months later I got a letter saying she and Robert were married. That's brutal." "That's family." Caleb picked up his fork again. "What about your husband?" "I thought you didn't want to hear about my tragic past." "I don't want to hear whining. Information is different." Clara smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "His name was Thomas. We married when I was 19. He was older, established, had a small ranch in Wyoming. My father approved." "But you didn't?" "I didn't know enough to disapprove. I was 19 and stupid and thought marriage was supposed to feel like duty." She pushed food around her plate. "Thomas was functional. He needed a wife to cook and manage the household. I needed security. It worked until it didn't." "What changed?" "He died, kicked by a horse, and I discovered that the ranch I thought was ours was actually his brother's, and the security I thought I had was actually permission to exist in someone else's space." Caleb heard the bitterness under the practiced calm. "The brother forced you out?" "The brother sold the ranch and suggested I find a new husband. Quickly." Clara met his eyes. "I decided I'd rather freeze to death in Montana than marry someone else out of desperation." "Yet you showed up here knowing I was looking for a wife." "I showed up here knowing you'd rejected 20 women, figured that meant you probably weren't actually looking, or if you were looking for something none of them had." "What's that?" "I don't know," Clara said honestly. "What are you looking for?" The question hung in the air between them. Caleb thought about Sarah, about the 20 brides who'd come and gone, about the house he'd built for a future that never happened and now lived in like a tomb. "I don't know anymore," he said finally. "Maybe nothing. That's sad." "That's realistic." Clara shook her head. "No. Realistic is knowing what you want might not exist. Sad is deciding to stop wanting it anyway." Before Caleb could figure out how to respond to that, she stood, gathering dishes. "I should finish the November accounts before bed. Thank you for dinner conversation. You cooked. You provided the venue." She smiled again, and this time it almost reached her eyes. "Good night, Mr. Granger." "Caleb." She paused at the doorway. "What?" "If you're going to be here longer than a month, you should call me Caleb." Clara studied him for a long moment. Then, "Good night, Caleb. After she left, Caleb sat alone at the table and tried to remember when he'd last had a conversation that felt like that. Real. Honest. Two people saying true things instead of performing for each other. He couldn't remember. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, for the first time in years, the house felt less empty. The incident happened in mid-December. Caleb came back from checking the livestock to find Clara in the barn, standing on a ladder she had no business being on with her injured foot, trying to reach a box on the top shelf. "What the hell are you doing?" he shouted. Clara startled, wobbled, and Caleb was already moving. He caught her as she fell, both of them going down in a tangle of limbs and hay. "Are you insane?" Caleb demanded, not letting go even though they were both on the ground now. "You can't even walk right and you're climbing ladders?" "I needed the box," Clara shot back, trying to push him off. "It's December, and you don't have any of your December records. So you decided to kill yourself getting them?" "I decided to do my job." They were both breathing hard, faces inches apart, and Caleb suddenly became aware that he was essentially lying on top of her. He rolled off quickly, stood, offered a hand. Clara took it, let him pull her up. "You're bleeding," Caleb said, pointing at her arm. Clara looked down at the scrape, barely deep. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing. Come inside." "I'm fine." "Clara." He used the voice he used on stubborn cattle. "Inside. Now." She glared at him but limped toward the house. Caleb followed, carrying the box she'd been trying to reach. In the kitchen, he made her sit while he got water and bandages. The scrape was minor, like she'd said, but he cleaned it anyway. His hands looked huge against her small arm. "You can't do things like that," he said quietly, wrapping the bandage. "You're still healing. I'm tired of being useless." "You're not useless. You fixed 5 years of books in 3 weeks. But if you're dead, you can't fix anything." Clara was quiet while he finished, then, "Why do you care?" "What?" "Why do you care if I fall off a ladder? I'm just temporary help." Caleb looked at her, really looked at her, and realized he didn't have a good answer. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Well," Clara stood, testing her weight on her injured foot. "When you figure it out, let me know." She left him standing there, holding bandages and questions he didn't know how to ask. That night, Caleb lay awake in his empty bed and thought about brown eyes and sharp words, and a woman who'd rather climb dangerous ladders than ask for help. He thought about how the house felt different now, less empty, less quiet. He thought about Marcus's words from weeks ago. "You're living like a man with nothing to lose." And for the first time in 11 years, Caleb wondered if maybe he'd been wrong about what he wanted. Or more accurately, if maybe he'd been lying to himself about not wanting anything at all. Christmas came to the ranch like an afterthought, barely acknowledged, except for the fact that Marcus distributed extra whiskey rations to the men and someone hung a pine branch over the bunkhouse door. Caleb had never been one for celebrations. The holiday just reminded him of all the years he'd spent alone in this big house, all the futures that had failed to materialize. But this year, Clara was here. He found her in the kitchen on Christmas morning, pulling bread from the oven. The smell hit him before he even opened the door. Yeast and butter and something sweet he couldn't identify. "You're baking," he said, stating the obvious because his brain had apparently stopped working. "I'm baking," Clara confirmed, not turning around. "The men deserve something better than hardtack on Christmas." "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to. I want to." She finally looked at him, flour dusting her cheek. "Unless you're going to tell me that's against the rules too." Caleb had been watching her limp around the house for 3 weeks now, stubborn and proud and refusing help with anything, and something about the flour on her face made his chest hurt in a way he didn't understand. "No rules against baking," he said. "Good. Then make yourself useful and take these out to the bunkhouse before they get cold." She handed him a tray loaded with rolls so fresh they were still steaming. Their fingers brushed. It lasted maybe half a second, but Caleb felt it all the way to his bones. He took the tray and left before he could do something stupid like stand there staring at her. The men fell on the bread like starving dogs, whooping and thanking him with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for pay raises. Tommy actually had tears in his eyes. "Boss, where'd you find her?" he asked through a mouthful of roll. "She found me," Caleb said, and realized how true that was. When he got back to the house, Clara had set the table, 2 plates, coffee, More bread, plus eggs and bacon and fried potatoes. "You're joining me," Caleb said. Not a question. "Unless you want to eat alone on Christmas." He sat. She sat across from him. They ate in silence for a few minutes before Clara spoke. "My mother used to make bread like this every Sunday. She said it was wasteful, using that much butter and sugar, but my father loved it, so she did it anyway." "Your father still alive?" "No. Died when I was 22. Heart just stopped one day while he was working in the field." Clara cut her eggs precisely, the way she did everything. "Thomas and I buried him next to my mother. That was the last time Thomas was kind to me, actually. At the funeral. After that, it was just duty." Caleb put down his fork. "He hit you?" "No, nothing like that." Clara was quiet for a moment. "He just made it very clear that I was a function, not a person. I cooked, cleaned, managed the household accounts. In exchange, I had a roof and food. When I tried to be anything more than that, when I suggested improvements to the ranch, or wanted to learn about the cattle business, or even just wanted to have an actual conversation, he'd look at me like I'd forgotten my place. Sounds like a bastard." Clara laughed, sharp and surprised. "He was, but I married him anyway, because I was 19 and stupid, and thought security mattered more than happiness." "Security does matter. Not more than being seen as human." The words hung between them like smoke. Caleb thought about Sarah, about how she'd looked at him toward the end, like he was an obstacle to the life she really wanted. He thought about the 20 brides who'd come looking for his money and left when they realized money was all he had. "I see you," he said, and then immediately wanted to take it back because it sounded insane. But Clara didn't laugh. She just looked at him with those dark eyes and said, "I know." They finished breakfast in silence that felt different than before. Heavier, more deliberate. Later that night, Caleb found a package on his desk. Plain brown paper tied with kitchen twine. Inside was a ledger. Not one of his ranch books, but something new. The pages were organized with the kind of precision that screamed Clara's handiwork. Categories. Projections. 5-year plans. Year Otsam. There was a note on the first page in her perfect handwriting. "Your books were chaos. This is what they should look like. Merry Christmas." Caleb stood in his office, holding a ledger that represented hundreds of hours of work Clara had done while recovering from injuries that should have killed her, and felt something crack open in his chest that he thought was permanently sealed. He didn't know what to do with the feeling, so he did what he always did. He went back to work. But the ledger stayed on his desk, and every time he looked at it, that crack got a little wider. The new year arrived with more snow and temperatures so cold that water froze solid in the pipes. Caleb and the men spent 2 days thawing everything out, working in shifts because staying outside longer than an hour meant risking frostbite. Clara watched from the kitchen window, and Caleb could feel her frustration at being unable to help. When he came in that night, half frozen and exhausted, she had hot stew waiting and didn't say a word about him tracking snow across her clean floor. "You're going to kill yourself," she said instead, ladling stew into a bowl. "Probably." "I'm serious, Caleb. You can't keep working 20-hour days in this weather." "What do you want me to do? The ranch doesn't stop because it's cold." "The ranch has 43 men who can handle things for one day while you sleep. I don't pay them to do my job." Clara slammed the ladle down hard enough to make him jump. "You don't pay me at all, and I'm doing my job just fine, while also making sure you don't starve or freeze to death. Maybe try trusting other people occasionally." They stared at each other across the kitchen. Caleb's exhausted brain couldn't figure out if they were fighting or if she was just worried about him. Both options seemed equally impossible. "Why do you care?" he asked, echoing her words from weeks ago. Clara's expression shifted, softened. "I don't know," she said quietly, "but I do." That night, Caleb slept for 12 hours straight. When he woke, there was fresh coffee and breakfast and a note from Marcus saying everything was handled. He ate alone because Clara was in the office doing what she always did and tried not to think about how much easier it was to rest knowing she was there. January bled into February. The cold persisted, the isolation deepened, and somewhere in all that frozen time, something shifted between them. It started with small things. Clara began leaving coffee on his desk in the mornings. Caleb started checking on her foot without being asked, making sure she was healing properly. They fell into a routine: breakfast together, work during the day, dinner together, then a few hours in the evening where they'd sit in the main room and she'd read while he pretended to review paperwork, but was actually just watching her. "You're staring," Clara said one night without looking up from her book. "I'm thinking." "About?" Caleb should have lied. Should have said something about cattle or accounts or the weather. Instead, he said, "About how different the house feels now." Clara did look up then. Different how? Less empty. She studied him for a long moment. "Is that good or bad?" "I don't know yet." "Fair enough." She went back to her book, but Caleb caught the small smile on her face. The next day he found her in the barn again, this time safely on the ground, looking at the empty stalls. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Planning." "Planning what?" Clara turned to face him, eyes bright with something Caleb recognized as dangerous. An idea. "You have all this space you're not using. These stalls are empty half the year. The southern barn is practically abandoned. You're sitting on potential you're completely ignoring." "I'm a cattle rancher. I use what I need." "You could be more than a cattle rancher." Clara was getting animated now, gesturing at the empty space. "You have the land, the infrastructure, the water rights. You could diversify. Horses, sheep, even crops if you set up proper irrigation." "I don't know anything about horses or sheep." "So learn, or hire people who do." Caleb crossed his arms. "And what would be the point?" "The point," Clara said with the kind of patience usually reserved for small children, "is that putting all your resources into one thing is how you lose everything when that one thing fails. My father taught me that. His farm survived because he never depended on just wheat or just livestock. He spread the risk." "Your father's farm still failed." Claire's face went tight. "My father died. The farm didn't fail. His children failed it by not maintaining what he built." Caleb realized he'd stepped on something painful and raw. "I'm sorry, that was true but cruel," Clara finished. "Yeah, seems to be your specialty." She started to walk past him, but Caleb caught her arm. Gently. "Clara, wait." She stopped but didn't look at him. "You're right," Caleb said. "About diversifying, about using the space better, about all of it. I don't know how to do things differently than I've always done them." "Then maybe it's time to learn." She pulled away and left him standing in the barn, wondering when exactly this temporary worker had started making him question everything he thought he knew about running his own ranch. That night at dinner, Caleb brought it up again. "If I was going to diversify," he said carefully, "what would you suggest?" Clara looked up from her plate, surprised. "You're actually considering it?" "I'm considering that you've been right about everything else so far. Might as well listen to you about this too." A real smile broke across her face, and Caleb felt that crack in his chest widen another inch. "Horses," she said immediately. "Montana is growing. More people means more demand for good-working horses. You have the grazing land, the facilities, and honestly, you're one of the few ranchers in the territory with enough capital to invest in quality breeding stock without risking everything. You've thought about this." "I've thought about a lot of things while sitting in your office for 2 months." Caleb ate in silence for a minute, processing. "I'd need someone who knows horses. Tommy worked on a horse ranch in Wyoming before he came here. He mentioned it once. And there's a horse trader in Helena who—" "You've really thought about this." Clara met his eyes. "I told you. I can do more than just books, but you have to actually trust me." Trust. That word again. The thing Caleb had sworn off after Sarah, after his brother, after every person who'd ever proven that trust was just another word for eventual disappointment. But Clara wasn't asking for blind faith. She was asking for a chance to prove what she could do. And hadn't she already proven it a dozen times over? "All right," Caleb said. "Talk to Tommy. Find out what he knows. If it makes sense, we'll pursue it." Clara's smile could have lit the whole territory. "You won't regret this." "I better not." The horse idea became Clara's project. She spent the next week interviewing Tommy, researching bloodlines, drafting proposals that made Caleb's head hurt with their complexity and thoroughness. She attacked it with the same fierce competence she brought to everything else, and Caleb found himself watching her work with something that felt dangerously close to pride. Marcus noticed, of course. "You're different lately," he said one afternoon while they were checking fence lines. Different how? Lighter. Like something stopped weighing on you. Caleb didn't know how to respond to that, so he didn't. It's her, isn't it? Marcus continued. The widow. Her name is Clara. I know her name, boss. Whole ranch knows her name. Also knows you're spending a lot of time with her. She works for me. Right. And I'm the King of England. Marcus grinned. It's good, you being lighter. The men have noticed too. You're less likely to bite their heads off for small mistakes. I don't bite heads off. You absolutely bite heads off. But less so now. Marcus clapped him on the shoulder. Just don't screw it up. There's nothing to screw up. She's temporary help. Boss, if you believe that, you're dumber than you look. That night, Caleb lay awake thinking about Marcus's words, about how the house felt different, about how he'd started looking forward to dinner, not because he was hungry, but because it meant sitting across from Clara, about how her laugh had become his favorite sound, about how terrified he was of what any of that meant. The confrontation came in mid-February, during one of Clara's increasingly frequent attempts to reorganize parts of the ranch. Caleb had never considered reorganizing. He found her in his office, moving furniture. What are you doing? Clara didn't even pause. This desk is in the worst possible position. The light is all wrong, and you're cramming yourself into a corner when you have this whole room. I like that corner. You like being uncomfortable and isolated. There's a difference. She shoved the heavy desk toward the window with determination that was impressive given her size. Caleb should have helped. Instead, he stood in the doorway and felt his temper rise. Stop. Almost got it. Clara, stop. Something in his voice made her freeze, like she looked at him, and whatever she saw in his face made her straighten. What's wrong? You can't just... Caleb gestured at the room, the desk, everything. You can't just come into my space and change things without asking. I'm making it better. I didn't ask for better. Well, maybe you should have, Clara shot back, temper rising to match his. Maybe you should have asked for a lot of things instead of just accepting that everything has to be hard and uncomfortable and isolated. This is my house, and you live in it like a prisoner. You have all this space and all this money, and you live like a man who's punishing himself for something. You don't know anything about me. I know you built this house for someone who left. I know you've spent 11 years proving you don't need anyone. I know you reject every person who tries to get close to you because you're so terrified of being hurt again that you'd rather die alone than risk trusting someone. The silence after her words was so complete, Caleb could hear his own heartbeat. Get out, he said quietly. Claire's face went pale. Caleb, get out of my office, get out of my house, get out. She left. He heard her footsteps, uneven because of her damaged foot, retreating down the hall, heard her door slam. Caleb stood alone in his rearranged office and felt the walls closing in. He found Marcus an hour later. I need you to take Clara into town tomorrow, Caleb said. Marcus looked up from the harness he was mending. Why? Because she's leaving. Leaving? Boss, it's February. She can't travel in this weather. She made it here and worse. Yeah, and nearly died doing it. Marcus stood, face concerned. What happened? Nothing happened. The trial period is over. She's done good work. I'll pay her for the time and arrange transport to wherever she wants to go. You're lying. Excuse me? You're lying, Marcus repeated. Something happened. You two had a fight. Caleb's jaw tightened. That's none of your business. It is when you're about to do something stupid out of pride. I'm not... What did she say? Marcus interrupted. What did she say that got under your skin enough to make you want to send her away in the middle of winter? Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then, she said I'm punishing myself. And she's wrong? She doesn't understand. Or she understands too well, and you can't handle it. Marcus crossed his arms. Boss, I've worked for you for 6 years. I watched you build this place from nothing. I watched you reject woman after woman because they weren't good enough or real enough or whatever enough. And then Clara showed up, and for the first time since I've known you, you've seemed like an actual human being instead of a machine that occasionally eats food. Marcus, I'm not done. You want to send her away because she sees you, really sees you, and that scares you more than any storm or financial risk or business decision. So you're going to throw away the best thing that's happened to this ranch, to you, because you're too proud and too scared to admit you need someone. I don't need anyone. Then why are you so angry that she's leaving? Caleb opened his mouth, closed it. Couldn't find an answer that wasn't a lie. Marcus shook his head. Figure out what you want, boss, but do it fast, because women like Clara Bennett don't come around twice. Caleb didn't sleep that night. He paced his room, then the house, then stood in the office Clara had been rearranging and looked at the desk in its new position. The light was better here. She'd been right about that. She'd been right about a lot of things. Around 3 in the morning, he found himself outside her door. He could hear her moving around inside, probably packing, probably planning her exit from his life. He knocked. The movement stopped. Long pause. Then, "What? Can we talk?" "No?" "Clara, I said no. You want me gone? I'll be gone. But I'm not doing this conversation." Caleb pressed his forehead against the door. "I don't want you gone." Silence. "I'm sorry," he continued, talking to wood because it was easier than talking to her face. "You were right about the desk, about the house, about me. You were right about all of it." More silence. "I'm terrified," Caleb said, and the words came out raw. "I'm terrified that if I let myself care about you, you'll realize what everyone else realizes, that I'm not enough." After years of pushing everyone away, one confession changed everything. But was Caleb finally too late? And for the first time in 11 years, Caleb Granger opened the door. That this ranch and this house and this life isn't enough. That I'm not capable of being what you need. The door opened. Clara stood there in her nightgown, hair loose around her shoulders, eyes red like she'd been crying. She looked furious and sad and beautiful. "You're an idiot," she said. "I know. I don't need you to be anything except honest with me. I don't need this house to be bigger or fancier. I don't need fancy clothes or social status or whatever those other women wanted." She stepped closer. "I just need you to stop assuming I'm going to leave and actually let me stay." "What if you do leave? What if you wake up one day and realize this isn't what you want? Then I leave, and you survive it, because you're Caleb Granger, and surviving is what you do." Clara reached up and touched his face, gentle. "But what if I don't? What if I stay and this actually works and we build something real? Doesn't that possibility scare you more?" It did. It absolutely did. "I don't know how to do this," Caleb admitted. "Neither do I. We'll figure it out together. I'm bad at trusting people. I'm bad at asking for help. We're a disaster." "Clara," she kissed him. It wasn't romantic or smooth or anything like what Caleb had imagined kissing her would be like. It was desperate and messy, and tasted like salt from tears he wasn't sure belonged to him or her or both of them. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Clara said, "I'm staying, not because you're paying me, not because I have nowhere else to go. Because I want to. Because somehow, despite your best efforts to be completely impossible, I care about you. And if you send me away because you're scared, I will never forgive you." Caleb pulled her close, buried his face in her hair. "Okay. Okay. Okay, you can stay. Okay, I'll try to trust you. Okay to all of it." Clara wrapped her arms around him and held on tight. "The desk really does look better by the window." Caleb laughed, surprising himself. "It does!" They stood in the hallway holding each other while the house settled around them and winter howled outside, and for the first time in 11 years, Caleb Granger let himself believe that maybe, possibly, he didn't have to be alone anymore. The next morning, neither of them mentioned the kiss. Caleb came down to find Clara already in the kitchen, making coffee like nothing had happened, and he stood in the doorway feeling like a teenager who didn't know what to do with his hands. "Morning," she said without turning around. "Morning. Eggs or just coffee?" "Both, please." Clara nodded and started cracking eggs into a pan. The silence stretched between them, not quite comfortable but not hostile either. More like they were both waiting to see who'd break first. Caleb broke first. "About last night, if you're going to apologize for kissing me, don't." Clara flipped the eggs with more force than necessary. "If you're going to tell me it was a mistake, I don't want to hear it. And if you're going to ask what happens now, I don't have an answer yet." "I was going to say thank you." That made her pause. She turned to look at him, spatula still in hand. For what? For not leaving. For being honest. For... He gestured helplessly. For everything. Clara's expression softened. You're welcome. Now sit down and eat before these get cold. They ate in silence, but it was different now. Every time their eyes met across the table, something passed between them that Caleb didn't have words for. Want, maybe. Possibility. Fear dressed up as hope. After breakfast, Clara went to the office and Caleb went to check on the livestock. And if Marcus noticed that the boss was smiling for no apparent reason, he was smart enough not to mention it. The thaw started in March. Not the emotional kind that had already begun. The actual thaw, where temperatures finally climbed above freezing and stayed there long enough for snow to start melting. Water ran down from the mountains in rushing streams. The land emerged from under its white blanket like something being born. And with the thaw came work. Caleb and his men spent 14-hour days checking fences damaged by winter snow, moving cattle to fresh grazing, assessing what they'd lost to the cold. The count was better than expected, only 18 head total, much lower than previous years. Marcus credited the new shelter system they'd built in the fall, but Caleb knew it was also luck. Clara threw herself into the horse project with the kind of focused intensity that reminded Caleb why he'd agreed to it in the first place. She'd recruited Tommy, who turned out to know more about horse breeding than anyone had realized, and together they'd drafted plans that were actually feasible. Not cheap, but feasible. We need to go to Helena, Clara announced one evening, spreading papers across the dinner table like she owned it, which Caleb was starting to realize she kind of did. Why Helena? Because that's where the horse trader is, the one I told you about. He's got breeding stock, good lines, sound animals, fair prices, but we need to see them in person before we commit to anything. That's a 3-day trip minimum. I know. In early March, roads are going to be terrible. I know that too. Caleb studied her. You really want to do this? I really want to do this, Clara confirmed. This ranch could be something more than just cattle, could be the best horse operation in Montana territory, but not if we don't start now, while everyone else is still thinking winter. She was right. Timing mattered in ranching, and getting ahead of the competition was how you stayed ahead. Still, the idea of 3 days on the road with Clara, just the two of them, made something in Caleb's chest tighten. We'd need to bring Marcus, he said. Can't leave the ranch without both of us. Clara's face fell slightly. Right. Of course. But if Marcus stays and Tommy comes instead, that works too. Tommy knows horses better anyway. You sure? No, Caleb said honestly. But I'm doing it anyway. They left for Helena on a Tuesday morning when the sky was that particular shade of blue that promised good weather but could turn mean without warning. Tommy drove the wagon while Caleb and Clara rode alongside on horseback. Clara sat her mount like someone who'd been riding since childhood, comfortable and confident despite her injured foot. The road to Helena was exactly as bad as Caleb had predicted. Mud from snowmelt turned sections into soup. Other parts were still frozen solid with ice, hidden under innocent-looking puddles. They made slow progress, stopping frequently to rest the horses and navigate particularly difficult stretches. But they made progress. That first night, they camped under stars so bright and numerous they looked fake. Tommy built a fire and cooked beans while Caleb tended the horses, and Clara organized their supplies with the same precision she brought to everything else. You always this organized? Tommy asked, watching her arrange things in perfect rows. Habit from living with Thomas. He wanted everything just so. Clara paused. Except me, apparently. I was never quite organized enough for his standards. His loss, Tommy said simply, and went back to stirring beans. Caleb caught Clara's eye across the fire and saw her smile. Small, but genuine. Something warm settled in his chest that had nothing to do with the flames. Later, after Tommy had fallen asleep and the fire had burned down to coals, Clara came to sit beside Caleb where he was keeping watch. Can't sleep? He asked. Not tired yet. She pulled her coat tighter against the cold. It's beautiful out here, different than Wyoming. How so? Bigger, emptier, like there's room to breathe. She was quiet for a moment. Thomas's ranch was small, cramped. I felt like the walls were always closing in. Is that why you left? Part of it. Mostly I left because staying meant marrying whoever his brother picked out for me, and I'd rather die than do that again. She looked at him. You understand that, right? Not wanting to be someone's convenient solution? Yeah, Caleb said. I understand that. Is that why you rejected all those women? Because they were looking for convenience? They were looking for money and status and a certain kind of life. I just happened to be attached to it. Clara nodded slowly. But you loved someone once. Sarah. Caleb stiffened. How do you know about Sarah? Marcus mentioned her? Said she's the reason you built the house so big, then decided you hated it. I don't hate the house. You live in it like you hate it. Like every room is a reminder of something you lost. Caleb wanted to argue, but couldn't find the lie in what she'd said. Sarah wanted things I couldn't give her. Or wouldn't. I'm still not sure which. What kind of things? Certainty. Guarantees, a life that didn't involve risk or struggle or building something from nothing. He stared into the darkness. She wanted me to be someone I wasn't, and when I couldn't do it, she left. Do you still love her? The question should have hurt more than it did. No. But I'm still angry about it, which is probably worse. Clara was quiet for so long Caleb thought maybe the conversation was over. Then she said, I'm not looking for certainty or guarantees. I've had that kind of life, and it nearly killed who I was. I'd rather have honest struggle with someone real than comfortable lies with someone convenient. Even if honest struggle means failing, especially then, because at least failure means you tried. Caleb looked at her profile in the firelight, this woman who'd ridden through a blizzard on nothing but hope and desperation, who'd spent 3 months fixing his books and his ranch and maybe even him, and felt something shift inside his chest like tectonic plates rearranging. Clara, don't, she said softly. Don't say anything you're not ready to mean. So he didn't. He just sat beside her and watched the stars and let the silence say what he couldn't. They reached Helena on the 3rd day, mud-splattered and exhausted but intact. The town was bigger than Caleb remembered, growing fast on mining money and railroad expansion. New buildings crowded the streets. Telegraph wires crisscrossed overhead like spiderwebs. Progress, people called it, though Caleb wasn't entirely sure what they were progressing toward. The horse trader's operation was on the east edge of town, a sprawling facility with good barns and better fencing. The trader himself was a man named George Hutchins, weathered and sharp-eyed, the kind of person who could spot a lame horse from 100 yards. Mr. Granger, Hutchins said, shaking Caleb's hand, your woman here wrote me quite the letter. She's not my... Caleb started, then stopped because he didn't know how to finish that sentence. Clara handles my business correspondence. Smart woman, then. Come on, I'll show you what I've got. They spent the next 3 hours looking at horses. Hutchins had good stock, working breeds, sturdy and sound, with bloodlines that would improve any ranch's herd. Tommy asked technical questions that Caleb only half understood, while Clara took notes with the kind of focus she usually reserved for accounting. By the end, they'd identified 6 horses worth buying, 4 mares and 2 young stallions with promising pedigrees. That's $1,500, Hutchins said. Cash or bank draft? Caleb didn't hesitate. Bank draft. I'll have my bank in Miles City transfer the funds within the week. Done. Hutchins stuck out his hand again. You picked good ones. Treat them right. They'll build you the best horse operation in the territory. That's the plan. They arranged transport for the horses and found rooms at a boarding house that smelled like cabbage and old wood. Tommy took one room, Caleb and Clara the other 2. Separate rooms. Proper. Except Caleb couldn't sleep. He lay in a bed that was too soft after months on his own harder mattress, listening to Helena's nighttime sounds through thin walls, and thought about Clara sleeping one door over. Thought about her sitting beside him under the stars. Thought about the kiss they still hadn't talked about. Around midnight, there was a soft knock on his door. He opened it to find Clara standing there in her nightgown and coat, hair loose around her shoulders. Can't sleep either? He asked. Too many people. Too much noise. She hesitated. Can I come in? Caleb stepped aside. Clara walked past him and sat in the room's single chair, pulling her coat tight. This doesn't mean anything inappropriate. I don't want to be alone right now. Okay? Okay? Okay. You can stay. They sat in silence for a while, Caleb on the edge of the bed, Clara in the chair. The boarding house creaked and settled around them. Somewhere down the hall, someone was snoring. I'm scared, Clara said finally. Of what? Of this. Of us. Of what happens when we get back to the ranch and this becomes real instead of just possibility. She looked at him. I've been married to one man who saw me as a function. I can't do that again, Caleb. I can't be with someone who needs me for what I do instead of who I am. I don't need you for what you do. Then what do you need me for? Caleb searched for the right words and couldn't find them, so he told her the truth instead. I don't know. I just know that when you're not around, everything feels wrong. The house feels empty. Food doesn't taste right. Work is just work instead of something I'm building toward. And when you are around, everything is better, harder, scarier, more complicated. He met her eyes, but also better. Yeah. Clara stood and crossed the small room to sit beside him on the bed. I'm not Sarah. I'm not going to leave because this gets hard. How do you know? Because hard is all I've ever known, and I'm still here. She took his hand. I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to be honest, to let me in, to stop waiting for me to leave and actually believe I might stay. I'm trying. I know, so am I. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat like that until dawn started graying the windows. Then Clara slipped back to her own room before Tommy woke up and got ideas, and Caleb lay back down and slept better than he had in weeks. The trip back to the ranch took 4 days because they had to move slower with the horses following behind. But those 4 days were some of the best Caleb could remember. They talked about plans for the ranch, argued about where to put the new breeding barn, debated bloodlines and training methods, and whether they should focus on working horses or show animals. They didn't talk about what was happening between them. Didn't need to. It was there in every conversation, every shared glance, every accidental touch that didn't feel quite accidental. Tommy definitely noticed. You two are ridiculous, he said on the third night, poking at the campfire with a stick. What's that supposed to mean? Caleb asked. Means you're both dancing around each other like teenagers at their first social. Either do something about it or don't, but the rest of us are getting tired of watching. The rest of you? Clara asked. The whole ranch knows, ma'am. Been making bets on when the boss finally admits he's sweet on you. Caleb felt his face heat. You're betting on my personal life? Nothing else to do during Montana winters. Tommy grinned. For what it's worth, I got my money on you proposing before summer. There's no, Caleb sputtered. Clara laughed, actually laughed, and the sound made Caleb forget why he was supposed to be angry. They arrived back at the ranch on a Saturday afternoon to find Marcus and the rest of the hands waiting. The horses were transferred to their new accommodations, plans were made for breeding schedules and training rotations, and life resumed its familiar rhythm. Except nothing was familiar anymore. Caleb found himself making excuses to be wherever Clara was. If she was in the office, he suddenly had paperwork that needed attention. If she was in the kitchen, he was hungry. If she was outside surveying potential locations for her garden project, another idea she'd developed during winter, he needed to check that particular section of land. Marcus caught him skulking around the barn one afternoon when Clara was inside looking at feed storage. This is getting pathetic, boss. I'm checking the structure. You checked the structure yesterday, and the day before that, and every day this week. Marcus crossed his arms. Just talk to her. We talk all the time. About the ranch, about horses, about everything except what you actually want to talk about. Which is? How you feel about her, how she feels about you, what you're going to do about any of it. Caleb kicked at a rock. What if I do something and it ruins everything? The ranch is running better than it ever has. Clara's happy. I'm less miserable than usual. Why risk that? Because less miserable isn't the same as happy, and you deserve better than that. Marcus put a hand on Caleb's shoulder. Boss, I've known you for 6 years. I've never seen you like this. Don't let fear make you waste it. That night, Caleb found Clara in the office, surrounded by papers as usual. She looked up when he came in, smiled that small smile that had become his favorite thing. Need something? She asked. Yeah, I need to tell you something. Clara put down her pen. Okay. Caleb sat across from her, took a breath. I'm terrible at this. At feelings and talking about them and all the things normal people seem to do without thinking. I spent 11 years convincing myself I didn't need anyone, and now you're here and I don't know how to do this. Do what? Tell you that I care about you. More than I should. More than is probably smart. And I keep waiting for you to realize you made a mistake staying here, but you haven't. And I don't know what to do with that. Clara leaned back in her chair, studying him. You want to know what I think? Yeah, I think you're so used to people leaving that you're trying to protect yourself before it happens. But Caleb, I'm not protecting myself. I'm all in on this, whatever this is. And that terrifies me because the last time I trusted someone with everything, it destroyed me. I wouldn't... I know. That's what makes it scarier. Because I believe you. She stood and walked around the desk. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to stop dancing around this. We're going to admit that something is happening between us and see where it goes. And we're going to be honest about it, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. What if I mess it up? Then we deal with it, together. Clara reached for his hand. But you have to actually try first. Caleb pulled her closer, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes. I'm trying. I know. This time when they kissed, it wasn't desperate or messy. It was slow and deliberate and felt like a promise neither of them knew how to put into words. When they broke apart, Clara rested her forehead against his. I need to tell you something too, she whispered. What? I'm falling for you. Probably have been since you carried me into your house half frozen and yelled at your men about it. She pulled back to look at him. And it scares me more than anything I've ever done. Even riding through a blizzard? Even that. Caleb kissed her again because words felt insufficient. And when they finally separated, both breathing hard, he said the most honest thing he could think of. I'm falling for you too, and I have no idea what I'm doing. Clara laughed, light and genuine. Good. We can figure it out together. Spring arrived in earnest after that, painting the ranch in colors Caleb had stopped noticing years ago. Clara started her garden with the same fierce determination she brought to everything, breaking ground on a plot of land near the house that got good sun. She planted vegetables and herbs and, despite Caleb's protests, flowers. Why flowers? He asked, watching her work dirt under her fingernails without complaint. Because they're beautiful. Because I want to. Because this is my home now, and I'm allowed to make it beautiful if I want to. She looked up at him, defiant. You have a problem with that? No, Caleb said, thinking about Sarah's roses that he'd burned in anger. No problem. The garden grew. The horses arrived and settled into their new routine. Tommy took to training them like he'd been born for it, working with the young stallions until they responded to voice commands and subtle pressure. The ranch hands adjusted to having Clara around permanently, stopped treating her like a guest, and started including her in the way they included Marcus, as someone whose opinion mattered. And Caleb learned what it meant to let someone in. It wasn't easy. His instinct was still to pull back, to protect himself, to assume the worst. But Clara wouldn't let him. When he tried to hide behind work, she'd show up and make him talk. When he got quiet and distant, she'd call him on it. When he forgot that he didn't have to do everything alone anymore, she'd remind him. You're infuriating, he told her one night after she'd badgered him into actually resting instead of working until he collapsed. You're stubborn, she shot back. I know. I know you know. That's what makes it infuriating. But she said it with a smile, and Caleb kissed her because he could now, because she was his and he was hers, and somehow that felt more terrifying and more right than anything he'd ever experienced. May brought thunderstorms that rolled down from the mountains like armies on the march. The ranch hands complained about the mud and the risk to the livestock, but Caleb had lived through enough Montana springs to know the rain was necessary. The grass needed it. The water table needed it. The whole territory needed it after the brutal winter. Clara loved the storms. She'd stand on the porch and watch lightning crack the sky, face turned up to the rain like she was drinking it in. You're going to get soaked, Caleb said, standing in the doorway. I don't care, it's amazing. It's just rain. It's not just rain. It's life. It's everything waking up after months of being dead. She turned to look at him. Don't you feel it? Caleb stepped out onto the porch beside her, let the rain hit his face. And yeah, when he actually paid attention, he felt it. The change, the promise, the sense that something new was beginning. I feel it, he said. Clara took his hand, laced their fingers together. Good. They stood like that until the storm passed and the sun broke through clouds like it had something to prove, painting everything in golden light that made the wet world sparkle. The fight came in June. Not about anything important, which was somehow worse. Caleb wanted to expand the north pasture. Clara thought the money would be better spent on improving the existing facilities. They argued over dinner, then in the office, then loud enough that Marcus heard from outside and made himself scarce. "You're not listening to me," Clara shouted, her face flushed with anger. "I am listening. I just disagree." "No, you're hearing words and deciding I'm wrong without actually considering what I'm saying. That's not—" "It is. You do it all the time. You ask my opinion and then do whatever you wanted anyway." Caleb felt his own temper spike. "That's not fair. I've implemented almost every suggestion you've made. Almost isn't all, and the ones you ignore are always the ones that actually matter." Clara was pacing now, agitated. "You say you want a partner, but you still make every important decision alone." "Because it's my ranch. Then what am I? Just an employee with benefits?" The words hit Caleb like a physical blow. "That's not what I meant, but it's what you said." Clara stopped pacing, looked at him with eyes that were hurt and angry in equal measure. "I can't be with someone who sees me as less than equal. I did that with Thomas, and I swore I'd never do it again." "I don't see you as less than equal." "Then prove it. Actually listen when I talk. Actually consider that maybe I know what I'm talking about. Stop treating me like I'm here to decorate your life and start treating me like I'm living it with you." Caleb opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. Because she was right. He had been doing exactly what she accused him of, asking her opinion and then making decisions alone, letting her into some parts of his life, but keeping the important things locked away. "You're right," he said quietly. Clara blinked. "What?" "You're right. I'm sorry. I've been treating this like you're helping me, instead of like we're building something together." Some of the anger drained from Clara's face, replaced by wariness. "You mean that?" "Yeah, I mean it." Caleb ran a hand through his hair. "I don't know how to share control. I've been doing everything alone for so long that it's instinct now, but that doesn't make it right." Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then she crossed the room and took both his hands in hers. "I need you to actually work on that, not just say it." "I will. Because if you can't, this won't work. I need a partner, Caleb, not a boss who occasionally kisses me." "I know." He pulled her close. "I'm going to mess up. Probably a lot. But I'm going to try. That's all I'm asking." They held each other while the argument's adrenaline faded into exhaustion. Eventually, Clara pulled back and said, "For what it's worth, I think you're right about the north pasture." Caleb couldn't help but smile. "Yeah? Yeah, but I still think we should upgrade the facilities first. Maybe compromise, do half of each?" "That's actually smart." "I know. That's why you should listen to me more often." They worked out the details together, actually together, and Caleb learned something important. Sharing control didn't mean losing it. It meant building something stronger than one person could build alone. Summer deepened and the ranch bloomed. Clara's garden exploded with life, tomatoes and beans and squash, plus wildflowers that attracted bees and butterflies. The horses thrived under Tommy's training, developing into animals that attracted attention from other ranchers. Word spread that Caleb Granger had diversified, and suddenly people who'd written him off as the territory's cruelest bachelor were asking his advice. "You're becoming respectable," Marcus teased one afternoon. "Shut up." "It's true. People are calling you a visionary instead of a monster. They can call me whatever they want as long as they pay fair prices for horses." But Caleb knew what had really changed. It wasn't the diversification or the improved operation. It was Clara. Her presence had transformed not just the ranch, but him, and people could see it. One evening in late July, Caleb found Clara in her garden, harvesting tomatoes in the golden light of almost sunset. She looked up when he approached, smiled that smile that still made his chest tight. "Good day?" she asked. "Better now." He sat beside her on the ground, not caring about dirt. "I need to ask you something." Clara's hand stilled on the tomato plants. "Okay. Are you happy here?" "Yes." "I mean really happy, not just content or comfortable. Actually happy." Clara set down the basket and turned to face him fully. "What's this about?" "I'm trying to figure out if what we have is enough. If I'm enough." "Enough for what?" Caleb took a breath. "Enough for you to stay, permanently. Not as an employee or a temporary guest. As my partner. In everything." Clara went very still. "Caleb, I'm not proposing. Not yet. I just need to know if that's something you'd even want. Because if it's not, I need to know now before I can't imagine this place without you. Too late, Claire said softly. I can't imagine being anywhere else. Relief flooded through Caleb so strong it made him dizzy. Yeah? Yeah, she took his hand. But I need you to know something. If we do this, really do this, I need it to be real. Equal partnership. Not you making concessions to keep me happy. Actual shared life. I can do that. Can you? Really? Caleb thought about the past 6 months, about learning to listen, to compromise, to let someone else's voice matter as much as his own. It had been hard. It was still hard. But Clara was worth it. I can try, he said, and I'll keep trying until I get it right. Clara kissed him, slow and sweet, and the setting sun turned everything gold around them. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. Then yes, she whispered. I want to stay. I want to build this with you. I want all of it. Caleb held her close and felt something in his chest that had been frozen for 11 years finally, completely thaw. The letter from Robert arrived on a Tuesday in August, delivered by a rider who'd come all the way from Miles City with the week's mail. Caleb almost didn't open it. He recognized his brother's handwriting on the envelope and felt his jaw tighten automatically. 20 years of silence condensed into paper and ink. You going to open that or just glare at it? Clara asked from across the breakfast table. Deciding. It's been sitting there for 10 minutes. I'm a slow decider. Clara set down her coffee cup with deliberate force. It's from your brother. I know who it's from. Then open it. Whatever it says standing there scowling won't change it. Caleb slid his thumb under the seal and unfolded the single page. Robert's handwriting was cramped and formal, like he'd drafted the letter multiple times before committing to final copy. Caleb, I know we haven't spoken in 20 years, and you have every right to ignore this. But our father's farm is failing, and I don't have anywhere else to turn. The bank is threatening foreclosure. I need $5,000 to save it. I wouldn't ask if I had any other option. Emma is sick. Consumption, the doctor says, and we have 4 children who will have nowhere to go if we lose the land. I know what I did was unforgivable. I know I took the woman you loved and the life you should have had. But I'm begging you anyway. If you can find it in yourself to help, wire the money to First Bank of Columbus, Ohio. If you can't, I understand. Your brother, Robert. Caleb read it twice, then set it down on the table like it had burned him. What does it say? Clara asked quietly. Robert needs money. $5,000. That's a lot of money. It is. What for? Caleb told her. About the farm. About Emma, the woman he'd planned to marry before Robert took her. About the consumption and the children and the desperation that came through even Robert's careful handwriting. Clara was quiet for a long moment. What are you going to do? Nothing. Let him fail. He made his choices. Caleb, no. Caleb stood abruptly, the chair scraping loud against the floor. He took everything from me. My family, my home, the woman I loved. And now he wants me to save him from the consequences of his own bad decisions? It's been 20 years. And? Time doesn't erase what he did. Clara studied him with those dark eyes that saw too much. No, but holding on to anger for 20 years doesn't erase it either. It just means you've been carrying it all this time. I'm not giving him the money. I'm not saying you should. I'm saying you should think about why you're so angry about being asked. Caleb wanted to argue, but the words stuck in his throat. Because Clara was right. Damn her. The anger felt disproportionate to a simple request for money. It felt like every wound from 20 years ago ripping open at once. I need to work, he said instead, and left before she could say anything else that was true. He spent the day writing fence lines alone, checking for damage that didn't exist, finding excuses to stay away from the house and Clara's uncomfortable questions. By the time he got back, the sun was setting and he was no closer to knowing what to do. Marcus found him in the barn, unsaddling his horse with more force than necessary. Heard you got a letter from your brother, Marcus said. News travels fast. Clara's worried about you. Clara should mind her own business. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You're making her business yours by asking her to build a life with you. Can't have it both ways. Caleb cinched the saddle onto its rack harder than necessary. Robert stole my fiancée and now wants me to save his farm. You think I should just forgive that? I think forgiveness isn't about him. It's about you not carrying poison around for the rest of your life. Marcus leaned against the stall door. Also think $5,000 isn't going to bankrupt you, and helping your brother's kids not starve isn't the same as condoning what he did 20 years ago. Whose side are you on? Yours. Always yours. But sometimes being on someone's side means telling them when they're being stupid. Marcus pushed off the door. Emma's dying, boss. She's dying and their kids are going to lose everything. You can be mad at Robert forever if you want, but those kids didn't do anything except have the wrong parents. He left Caleb standing in the barn with those words echoing in his head. That night, Caleb and Clara ate dinner in silence. She didn't push, didn't ask questions, just let him work through whatever he needed to work through. It should have been a relief. Instead, it made him feel worse. I loved her, Caleb said finally, setting down his fork. Emma, I really loved her. Clara nodded. I know. We had plans. I was going to ask her to marry me after my father's funeral. Figured we'd have the ceremony in spring, start our life together. He stared at his plate. Then I got that letter from Robert saying they were married, and I felt like someone had cut my legs out from under me. Did he explain why? Said they fell in love. Said it happened naturally, and he was sorry, but he couldn't help how he felt. Caleb laughed bitterly. Like that made it better. Like loving her was an excuse for betraying me. Maybe it wasn't an excuse. Maybe it was just the truth. You're defending him? No, I'm saying people can do terrible things and still be telling the truth about their feelings. Clara reached across the table, took his hand. You have every right to be angry, but you have to decide if being angry is worth more than being free. What if I send the money and it doesn't change anything? What if Robert takes it and I still hate him? Then at least 4 children won't starve, and you'll know you did the right thing regardless of how it makes you feel. Caleb turned her hand over in his, studying the calluses from garden work and accounting and all the labor she'd put into making this place better. When did you get so wise? I married a man who taught me that holding on to hurt only destroys the person carrying it. Took me years to learn the lesson, but I learned it. She squeezed his hand. You don't have to forgive Robert. You just have to decide whether punishing him is worth punishing yourself. Caleb sat with that for a long time after dinner was over. After Clara had gone to bed and the house was dark and silent, he sat in his office with Robert's letter and $5,000 worth of anger and asked himself the hard questions. Did he want to be the kind of man who let children suffer for their father's sins? Did holding on to this rage make him happy, or did it just make him the same bitter person he'd been when Sarah left? Was this who he wanted to be, someone who chose revenge over mercy? Around midnight, he wrote 2 letters. One to Robert, short and cold. The money will be wired tomorrow, or even now. Don't contact me again. The other to his bank in Miles City, authorizing the transfer. He sealed both and left them on the desk for the morning rider. Then he went to Clara's room and knocked softly. She opened the door in her nightgown, hair loose, eyes sleepy. Caleb, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Can I come in? She stepped aside and he entered, closing the door behind him. They stood in the darkness, and Caleb felt the words building in his chest like pressure before a storm. I sent the money, he said. Good. I don't feel good about it. You don't have to. You just have to know you did the right thing. Caleb pulled her close, buried his face in her hair. I don't want to be angry anymore. I don't want to be the person who holds grudges for 20 years and builds walls so high nobody can get through. I want to be better than that. Clara's arms came around him, strong and steady. You are better than that. You're just learning how to believe it. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the dark. Eventually, Clara pulled back and looked up at him. Stay, she said quietly. Clara, not like that, just stay. I don't want to be alone tonight, and I don't think you do either. So he did. They lay on top of the covers, fully clothed, and Caleb held her while she fell asleep against his shoulder. He stayed awake watching the moonlight move across the floor and thought about choices and consequences and how strange it was that the thing he'd fought against for so long, letting someone in, was the thing that made him feel most like himself. Morning came with complications. Tommy saw Caleb leaving Clara's room at dawn and had the decency to pretend he hadn't, but the damage was done. By breakfast, The whole ranch knew the boss had spent the night in Clara's room, and the speculation was running wild. "We should tell them," Clara said over coffee, watching Marcus try very hard to look busy outside the kitchen window. "Tell them what?" "The truth. That we're together. That this is serious." Caleb felt his stomach tighten. "You want to make it official. We've been dancing around it for months. At some point, we need to stop pretending this is casual." Clara set down her cup. "Unless you want it to be casual, in which case we should probably talk about that." "I don't want casual, I want—" Caleb struggled for the right words. "I want this to be real. I want everyone to know you're not just working here. You're mine." "Yours?" Clara raised an eyebrow. "Ours. We're together. Official." He was making a mess of this. "I'm saying I want to marry you. Eventually. When you're ready. If you're ready. I'm not proposing right now. I'm just saying that's where my head is, and if your head is somewhere else, we should probably figure that out before—" Clara kissed him, cutting off his rambling. When she pulled back, she was smiling. "My head is in the same place. But you're right, this isn't a proposal. When you actually propose, it better be better than this anxious mess." "Deal." They told the hands at lunch. Just came out and said it plain. They were together, it was serious, and anyone who had a problem with it could leave. Nobody left. Instead, Tommy whooped and Marcus grinned, and someone in the back yelled that he'd won the betting pool. "You bet on us?" Claire asked, trying to sound offended, but failing. "Ma'am, the whole territory's been betting on the boss since bride number 15, Tommy said cheerfully. "You were just the only one smart enough to figure out what he actually needed." "Which was?" "Someone who'd call him on his nonsense." Caleb should have been annoyed, but found he couldn't argue with the assessment. Life settled into a new rhythm after that. Clara moved her things into Caleb's room officially, and the house stopped feeling like two people living separately under the same roof. They worked together during the day, ate together, planned together, argued and made up and learned each other's edges. The horse operation was thriving. Tommy had trained 3 of the young animals to the point where they were ready to sell, and word of mouth brought buyers from as far as Helena. Caleb watched Clara negotiate prices with the kind of sharp competence that still surprised him, even though it shouldn't anymore. "You could have been running your own operation," he told her after one particularly successful sale. "I'm running my own operation. It just happens to be yours too." "Ours." "Ours," she agreed, and kissed him in front of the buyer, who looked scandalized and delighted in equal measure. But August brought more than just success. It brought the thing Caleb had been half expecting and fully dreading since the day Clara agreed to stay: doubt. It started small. Clara getting quiet during dinner, lost in thought, staring out windows with an expression Caleb couldn't read, spending more time in the garden alone, working the soil like she was trying to bury something. "What's wrong?" he asked one evening, finding her among the tomato plants long after the sun had set. "Nothing." "Clara." She didn't look at him. "Do you ever wonder if we're making a mistake?" The question hit Caleb like cold water. "What? This? Us? Building a life together when we barely know each other?" Now she did look at him, and her eyes were afraid. "We've known each other less than a year. How do we know this is real and not just convenience, loneliness, 2 broken people finding comfort?" Caleb sat down beside her, dirt and all. "Where is this coming from?" "I got a letter today. From Thomas's brother." Clara's hands twisted in her lap. "He's getting married. Asked if I wanted any of my old things from the ranch. Pictures, books, some furniture my mother left me." "Do you?" "I don't know. I spent 2 years with Thomas feeling like I was disappearing, and then I came here and everything felt so clear. But what if I'm just doing the same thing in a different place? What if I'm losing myself in you the same way I lost myself in him?" "You're not," Caleb said firmly. "How do you know?" "Because you fight with me. You challenge me. You don't shrink yourself to fit into my life. You expand it." He took her hand. "Thomas wanted a function. I want a partner. There's a difference." "But what if one day you wake up and realize you don't? What if you decide you liked your life better when it was just you and the ranch?" Caleb understood then. This wasn't about Thomas's brother's letter. This was about fear. The same fear he'd been carrying since Sarah left. The terror that letting someone in meant inevitable abandonment. "I can't promise I'll never wake up and have doubts," he said slowly. I can't promise this will be easy or that we won't mess it up sometimes. But I can promise that I want this. I want you. And I'm willing to fight for it even when it's hard. What if fighting isn't enough? Then we fight harder. He pulled her closer. Clara, you rode through a blizzard to get here. You survived being married to a man who treated you like furniture. You rebuilt my books, my ranch, and my entire life. If you can do all that, you can survive being scared sometimes. Clara leaned into him, and he felt her trembling. I'm terrified of losing you. Good. I'm terrified of losing you too. That's how we know it matters. They sat in the garden while the stars came out and Caleb held her through the fear. Because this was what partnership meant. Not the absence of doubt, but the willingness to face it together. September came with early cold that worried the ranchers and thrilled Clara, who said it meant her fall vegetables would be sweeter. The routine continued, work and meals and nights spent tangled together in a bed that had been empty for too long. But something had shifted after the garden conversation. Clara was lighter, more present, like naming the fear had somehow diminished its power. Caleb caught himself watching her sometimes, still amazed that she was real and staying. She'd be working on accounts or cooking or arguing with Tommy about training techniques, and he'd just stop and stare like a fool until someone called him on it. You're doing it again, Marcus said one afternoon. Doing what? Looking at her like you can't believe she's real. I can't. Better get used to it. Pretty sure she's not going anywhere. Caleb hoped that was true, believed it most days. But doubt had a way of creeping in during quiet moments, whispering that this was too good, too easy, too perfect to last. The crisis came in late September during what should have been a routine trip to Miles City for supplies. Caleb and Clara went together, planning to make it a quick overnight, pick up what they needed, maybe have a real meal at the hotel, head back the next morning. Simple, except nothing was simple when your past showed up uninvited. They were loading supplies into the wagon when Caleb heard someone call his name. He turned to find Sarah. Sarah who'd left him for Carmichael, Sarah who he hadn't seen in 11 years, standing on the sidewalk looking exactly like he remembered, and nothing like he remembered at the same time. Caleb Granger, she said, smiling like they were old friends. I heard you were doing well, but I had no idea. Caleb felt Clara tense beside him. Sarah, you look good. Montana agrees with you. Sarah's eyes flicked to Clara, curious. And who is this? Clara Bennett, Clara said, extending her hand with more composure than Caleb could have managed. I work with Caleb. Work with? Sarah's smile sharpened. How modern. Caleb found his voice. What are you doing here? I thought you were in Philadelphia. I was. Jonathan died last year. Heart attack. Very sudden. She said it with practiced sadness that didn't quite reach her eyes. I've been traveling, visiting old friends, trying to figure out what comes next. I'm sorry for your loss. Are you? Sarah studied him. You never wrote. Not once in 11 years. Didn't think you wanted me to. I didn't, but it's strange, isn't it? How people change. How life turns out different than we planned. She looked at Clara again. You're very lucky. Caleb was always wonderful at building things. Terrible at maintaining them, but wonderful at the building part. The barb was subtle, but Clara caught it. Caleb saw her jaw tighten. Actually, he's gotten much better at maintenance, Clara said sweetly. Some things just need the right foundation. Sarah's smile went rigid. How nice. Well, I should let you both get back to your work. Caleb, if you have time while you're in town, I'm staying at the Grand Hotel. Room 12. It would be lovely to catch up. She left before either of them could respond, disappearing into the crowd with the same elegant grace she'd had at 23. Caleb and Clara loaded the rest of the supplies in silence. The air between them felt heavy, loaded with things neither knew how to say. Finally, in the privacy of their hotel room, Clara spoke. Are you going to see her? No. She invited you. I don't care. Caleb. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded in her lap. If you need to talk to her to get closure or whatever, I don't need closure. I needed it 11 years ago. Now I just need her to leave me alone. She's a widow, alone, looking for connection. She made her choice. I'm not her backup plan. Clara was quiet for a moment. She's beautiful. So are you. She's refined, cultured, everything I'm not. Caleb crossed the room and knelt in front of her, taking her hands. She's everything I don't want. You're everything I do. There's no comparison. You loved her. I loved who I thought she was. Turns out, I was wrong. He squeezed her hands. Clara, look at me. Sarah left because this life wasn't good enough for her. You're here because this life is exactly what you want. That tells me everything I need to know about who I should choose. You already chose her once, and I was miserable. Then I chose you, and I'm not miserable. He almost laughed at how inadequate that sounded. I'm happy. Actually happy. And I'm not giving that up for someone who couldn't see what we were building. Clara's eyes were bright with tears she was trying not to shed. Promise me something. Anything. Promise that if you ever wake up and realize you made a mistake, if you ever want something different, you'll tell me. Don't just leave. Don't just disappear. Tell me. I promise. But Clara, that's not going to happen. You can't know that. I can, because I've had different. I've had alone. And this, you, is better than anything I've ever had. He pulled her close. Sarah was a dream I had when I didn't know what I actually needed. You're the reality I didn't know I was building toward. They held each other while the sun set outside the hotel window, and Caleb felt Clara's fear gradually ease. Later that night, tangled together in sheets that smelled like starch and strangers, Clara whispered against his shoulder, I love you. It was the first time either of them had said it out loud. Caleb's breath caught. Say it again. I love you. I have for months. I was just too scared to say it. I love you too. The words felt huge and terrifying and right. I think I have since you climbed that damn ladder and nearly killed yourself. Clara laughed, watery but genuine. That's a terrible moment to fall in love. Yeah, well, I'm not good at romance. You're better than you think. They made love that night with a new urgency, a new understanding that what they had was fragile and precious and worth protecting. And when Caleb finally fell asleep with Clara curled against him, he dreamed not of Sarah or the past, but of a future that finally felt possible. They left Miles City the next morning without Caleb seeing Sarah again. He didn't even think about it. His focus was on Clara beside him on the wagon, on getting home, on the life they were building together. The ranch welcomed them back with the familiar sounds and smells Caleb had come to associate with home. Marcus had kept everything running smoothly. Tommy had made progress with the horses. The accounts were balanced, the cattle were healthy, and Clara's garden was ready for harvest. That evening, standing in the garden with the last of the summer light turning everything gold, Caleb made a decision. He dropped to one knee in the dirt among the tomatoes and wildflowers and pulled out the ring he'd been carrying for 3 weeks. A simple gold band with a small diamond, nothing fancy, but real. Clara Bennett, he said, and his voice shook slightly. I'm terrible at this. I'm stubborn and closed off, and I work too much. I'm going to mess up and make you angry and probably drive you crazy sometimes. But I love you. I love how you fight with me and challenge me and refuse to let me hide behind work. I love that you see all my worst parts and stay anyway. I love that you turned this empty house into a home and this empire into something worth building. So, will you marry me? For real this time, not just talking about eventually, but actual marriage with witnesses and everything? Clara was crying, smiling, laughing all at once. Yes. Yes, you idiot. Of course I'll marry you. Caleb slid the ring onto her finger and she pulled him up to kiss him. And somewhere behind them, Tommy whooped because apparently the whole ranch had been watching from various hidden positions. Did you know they were there? Clara asked against his lips. Suspected. And you proposed anyway? Figured if I was going to make a fool of myself, might as well have witnesses. Clara kissed him again, deeper this time. And Caleb thought about all the years he'd spent alone, all the walls he'd built, all the brides he'd rejected because they wanted something from him he couldn't give. And then he thought about Clara, who'd asked for nothing and given him everything, and knew that sometimes the best things in life were the ones you never saw coming. The wedding was set for the first Saturday in October, which gave them 3 weeks to plan. Clara wanted simple, just the ranch hands, maybe a few people from town, nothing fancy. Caleb would have married her that same night in the garden if she'd let him, so simple worked fine. But those 3 weeks turned out to be anything but simple. The first problem came in the form of another letter, this time addressed to Clara. She opened it at breakfast, read it, and went pale. "What is it?" Caleb asked. Clara handed him the letter without speaking. It was from Thomas's brother, Edmund. "Mrs. Bennet, I regret to inform you that I made an error in my previous correspondence. Upon reviewing Thomas's will more carefully with my attorney, we've discovered that you are entitled to a portion of the ranch's sale proceeds, specifically 1/3 of the final amount, which comes to approximately $8,000. I apologize for the oversight. The funds are available for collection at First Bank of Cheyenne at your earliest convenience. You'll need to sign several documents to complete the transfer. Regards, Edmund Bennet." Caleb set the letter down carefully. $8,000. "I didn't know," Clara said quietly. "I thought I had nothing. That's why I left." "This changes things." "Does it?" Caleb heard the question beneath the question. "Does having money change who I am to you? Does it change why I'm here?" "You could go anywhere now," he said, choosing honesty over comfort. "Buy your own place. Start fresh somewhere without all this baggage." Clara stood abruptly, chair scraping. "Is that what you want? For me to leave?" "No, but I need to know you're staying because you want to, not because you have no other choice." "I already told you I'm staying. That was before you had $8,000. Clara slammed her hand on the table hard enough to make the coffee cups rattle. "Money doesn't change how I feel about you, you idiot. I came here with nothing, and I fell in love with you anyway. Having options doesn't make me want you less." "But it means you could what? Leave? Find someone easier? Someone who doesn't make me work so hard to get through his walls?" She was pacing now, angry and beautiful. "You think I don't know I could leave? I know every single day I could walk away. I choose not to. That's what love is. Choosing to stay when leaving would be simpler." Caleb felt something unknot in his chest. "I'm sorry, I'm being stupid." Yes, you are." But Claire's anger was already fading. She came around the table and took his face in her hands. "Listen to me. I love you. I'm marrying you, and I'm going to use that money to invest in our horse operation, because it's ours now, not just yours. Got it?" "Got it." "Good. Now stop being an idiot and kiss me." He did. And later, when Marcus asked why they were both smiling like fools, Caleb just said they'd had a productive financial discussion and left it at that. The second problem was Caleb's own brain, which apparently couldn't accept that good things were allowed to happen to him. He started second-guessing everything. The wedding venue. Was the ranch too casual? Should they do it in town? The ceremony itself? Should he write vows or just use the standard ones? The guest list. Were they inviting too many people? Too few? The wrong people? "You're spiraling," Marcus observed one afternoon, finding Caleb rearranging furniture in the main room for the third time. "I'm planning." "You're panicking. There's a difference." Caleb stopped moving chairs. "What if I mess it up?" "The furniture arrangement?" "The marriage. What if I'm terrible at being a husband? What if Clara realizes she made a mistake?" Marcus sat on the newly rearranged sofa. "Boss, you've been basically married for 6 months already. You eat together, sleep together, fight and make up, make decisions together. A ceremony doesn't change any of that. It makes it permanent. So, you want it to be permanent. What if she doesn't?" Did she seem uncertain when she said yes? Caleb thought about Clara in the garden, crying and laughing and saying yes like it was the easiest decision she'd ever made. "No." "Then trust her, and trust yourself. You're not the same man who drove away 20 women. You've changed." "Have I?" Marcus gestured around the house, at Clara's books on the shelves, the flowers she'd cut from the garden in a vase, the throw blankets she'd added to make the space less austere. "The house has changed. The ranch has changed. You smile now. You listen to other people's ideas. You've built something with her that you couldn't build alone. Yeah, boss, you've changed." Caleb sat beside Marcus and let that sink in. He had changed. The man who'd rejected bride after bride out of pride and fear didn't exist anymore. In his place was someone who'd learned, slowly, painfully, how to let someone in. "What if I change back?" he asked quietly. "Then Clara will call you on it and you'll change forward again. That's what partners do." The third problem came from an unexpected source. Clara herself. A week before the wedding, Caleb found her in the garden at midnight, sitting among the dried stalks of summer vegetables, crying quietly. "Clara, what's wrong?" She looked up, tears streaming down her face. "I'm terrified." Caleb sat beside her, unconcerned about dirt. "Of what?" "Of being a wife again. Of becoming that person I was with Thomas, small and quiet and disappearing." She wiped at her face angrily. "I know you're not him. I know this is different. But what if marriage changes me anyway? What if I wake up one day and realize I've made myself smaller to fit into your life?" "You haven't made yourself smaller. You've made my life bigger. Now. But what about a year from now? 5 years? What if I lose myself trying to be what you need?" Caleb took her hands, cold from the night air. "Then I'll remind you who you are. Same way you remind me when I start closing off. That's the deal, right? We keep each other honest. What if that's not enough? Then we figure it out, together." He pulled her closer. "Clara, I'm not asking you to be anyone except who you are. The woman who climbed dangerous ladders and fixed my books and yelled at me when I was being stupid. That's who I fell in love with. That's who I want to marry." Clara leaned into him, and he felt her trembling. "I'm so scared of failing at this again." "You didn't fail with Thomas. He failed you. There's a difference." "How do you know we won't fail each other?" "I don't," Caleb admitted, "but I know we're both going to try like hell not to, and I know that trying together is better than being safe and alone." They sat in the cold garden until Clara stopped crying and started talking instead, about Thomas, about the woman she'd been in that marriage, about all the ways she'd shrunk herself to fit into a life that wasn't hers. Caleb listened and held her and made promises he intended to keep about never making her feel that way again. "I need you to tell me if I'm disappearing," Clara said finally. "If you see me becoming less than I am, you have to say something." "I will. And you do the same for me. If I'm being closed off or controlling or any of the things I used to be, call me on it." "Deal." They sealed it with a kiss that tasted like salt and promises. And when they finally went inside, Clara fell asleep in his arms while Caleb stayed awake wondering how he'd gotten so lucky. The wedding day arrived with perfect October weather, cool but sunny, the sky that particular shade of blue that only happened in Montana autumn. Clara had picked wildflowers from her garden, and the ranch hands had helped set up chairs in front of the house where they'd have the ceremony. Caleb stood near the makeshift altar, Marcus beside him as best man, and tried not to throw up from nerves. "You look like you're about to pass out," Marcus muttered. "I might." "Don't. It's bad form to collapse before your bride gets here." Helpful advice. Then Clara appeared at the far end of the aisle, not walking from any building, just emerging from the direction of her garden like she'd grown there along with the flowers, and every thought in Caleb's head went silent. She wore a simple cream-colored dress, nothing fancy, with her hair loose around her shoulders. She carried a bundle of the wildflowers she'd grown herself. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with fashion or polish, and everything to do with being exactly, completely herself. Tommy was walking her down the aisle because she'd asked him, and because, as she'd said, he'd been one of the first people at the ranch to treat her like she belonged. When they reached Caleb, Tommy put Clara's hand in his and whispered, "Don't mess this up, boss." "Working on it," Caleb whispered back. The ceremony itself was short. The territorial justice of the peace read the standard vows, and Caleb and Clara repeated them. But when it came time for the rings, Caleb paused. "I know we said we'd stick to the script," he said, "but I need to say something first." Clara smiled, nervous but encouraging. "Okay." Caleb took a breath and looked at this woman who'd ridden through a blizzard and survived his walls and somehow decided he was worth loving. "A year ago, I was convinced I was better off alone. I'd built this empire and figured that was enough. Then you showed up, half frozen and asking for nothing, and you changed everything. You made me see that building walls doesn't make you strong. It just makes you isolated. And being isolated isn't the same as being safe." His voice cracked slightly, but he pushed through. "You taught me that real strength is letting someone see your worst parts and trusting they'll stay anyway. That partnership means sharing control instead of hoarding it. That love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone willing to struggle through imperfection with you." Clara was crying now, but smiling through it. "I'm going to mess up," Caleb continued. I'm going to revert to old habits and close off and probably make you want to strangle me sometimes. But I promise I'll keep trying. I promise I'll listen when you call me on it. And I promise that every single day I'll choose you. Not because I have to, because I want to." He slid the ring onto her finger, and Clara wiped at her tears before taking his hand. "I didn't prepare anything," she said, "because I figured the official vows were enough. But since you went and got all honest on me..." She took a shaky breath. "A year ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd used up my one chance at something real, and failed. Then I came here and met the angriest, most stubborn, most infuriating man I'd ever encountered, and somehow he let me in." Her grip on his hand tightened. "You taught me that asking for what I need isn't weakness, that fighting for something is better than accepting what you're given, that it's okay to be scared as long as you keep moving forward anyway. You saw me as a person instead of a function, and that changed everything." She slid his ring on with trembling fingers. "I'm going to mess up too. I'm going to be difficult and stubborn and probably remind you why you rejected all those other women. But I promise I'll stay. I promise I'll fight for this. And I promise that every single day I'll choose you too, because you're worth it." By the time the justice pronounced them married, half the ranch hands were crying, and Marcus was pretending he had something in his eye. Caleb kissed Clara like his life depended on it, and the hands whooped and hollered in a way that was completely inappropriate for a wedding and absolutely perfect for this one. The celebration afterward was exactly what they'd wanted. Simple food, decent whiskey, and people who actually cared about them instead of the spectacle. Tommy played fiddle surprisingly well, and some of the hands danced with each other when they ran out of women to dance with. Clara danced with Caleb, then Marcus, then every single ranch hand who asked, laughing the whole time. Caleb watched her move through the crowd. His wife, he could call her that now, and felt something settle in his chest that had been restless for 11 years. This was what Sarah had been afraid of. This messy, imperfect, real life built on trust and work and choosing each other every day. She'd wanted guarantees. But guarantees were just pretty lies, and Clara had taught him that honest struggle was worth more than comfortable certainty. Later, when the celebration had wound down and the hands had retreated to the bunkhouse, Caleb and Clara stood on the porch of their house, both of theirs now, and looked out at the ranch under moonlight. "You know what's funny?" Clara said, leaning against him. "What?" "I came here expecting nothing and got everything. You rejected 20 women looking for everything and found it with the one who wanted nothing. Guess we're both idiots. Happy idiots, though." "Yeah," Caleb agreed. "Happy idiots." They went inside to the house that was no longer empty, to the bed they now officially shared, and Caleb thought about how sometimes the things you build alone are just foundations waiting for someone else to help you finish them. Winter came again, as it always did in Montana, but this time Caleb wasn't facing it alone. Clara worked beside him through the cold months, managing books and planning for spring and slowly transforming the ranch from his empire into their partnership. The horse operation thrived. The cattle survived the season better than previous years, and the house that had once been a monument to everything Caleb had lost became a home filled with everything he'd found. They fought, of course. Clara's warning about him reverting to old habits proved accurate. He'd close off when stressed, make decisions without consulting her, fall back into the belief that handling everything alone was strength instead of stubbornness. And she'd call him on it every single time, refusing to let him hide behind work or walls. "We agreed," she'd say, standing in his office with her arms crossed. "Partners. Remember? That means you actually have to partner with me." And he'd apologize and try harder and slowly, gradually, learn that sharing control didn't mean losing it. It meant building something stronger than one person could build alone. Clara had her own struggles. Sometimes she'd catch herself shrinking, making herself smaller, falling into old patterns from her marriage to Thomas. She'd apologize for disagreeing with Caleb or defer to his judgment on things she actually had strong opinions about. And he'd catch it and remind her of their deal. "You're doing it again," he'd say. "Being quiet when you should be loud. What do you actually think?" And she'd take a breath and say what she meant and relearn that being heard didn't mean being punished. They grew into their marriage the way they'd grown into everything else, imperfectly, messily, honestly. Some days were harder than others. Some fights lasted longer than they should have. But they kept choosing each other, kept showing up, kept trying. Spring returned with all its chaos and promise. Clara's garden exploded back to life. bigger than the year before because she'd expanded it over winter. The horses they'd bought in Helena had produced a foal that Tommy swore was going to be the finest animal in the territory. The ranch prospered in ways that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with being built by two people instead of one. One evening in May, a year and a half after Clara had first collapsed at Caleb's gate, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and red. "You ever think about the 20 women before me?" Clara asked. Caleb considered the question. "Sometimes. Mostly I think about how lucky I am they all left. Because if they'd stayed, you wouldn't have had room for me. Because if they'd stayed, I would have spent my life with someone I didn't actually love, and that would have been worse than being alone." Clara took his hand, and he felt the calluses from garden work and accounting and all the labor that went into building a life together. "You think we would have worked if we'd met earlier, before all the hurt?" "No," Caleb said honestly. "I needed to be broken first. Needed to learn that walls don't protect you. They just keep you isolated. And you needed to learn that marriage doesn't have to mean disappearing. So we had to destroy ourselves to rebuild into people who could actually love each other." "Yeah, I guess so." Clara was quiet for a moment, then, "That's kind of beautiful. In a painful, messy way. That's life. Beautiful and painful and messy." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, and Caleb thought about all the versions of himself he'd been. The angry young man who'd fled Ohio, the heartbroken builder who'd loved Sarah, the bitter rancher who'd rejected every bride, the scared man learning to love Clara. Each version had been necessary to become the person sitting here now, holding hands with a woman who'd asked for nothing and given him everything. "I'm pregnant," Clara said into the quiet. Caleb's breath stopped. "What?" "I'm pregnant. About 2 months, the doctor thinks. I wanted to be sure before I told you." 1,000 thoughts crashed through Caleb's mind at once, joy and terror and questions and wonder. How do you feel about it?" "Terrified, excited, worried I'll be a terrible mother. Sure I want it anyway." Clara turned to look at him. "How do you feel?" Caleb searched for words and couldn't find any adequate ones, so he pulled her close and held her while his eyes burned with tears he didn't bother hiding. "I feel like the luckiest bastard in Montana," he finally managed. "Scared as hell, but lucky." Clara laughed, watery but genuine. "Good, because we're doing this, building this, all of it." "All of it," Caleb agreed. The baby, a girl they named Emma after Caleb's mother, not the other Emma, because that ghost had been laid to rest, arrived in December during a snowstorm that reminded Caleb of the one that had brought Clara to him. She was small and loud and perfect, and watching Clara hold her for the first time, Caleb understood something he'd never quite grasped before. Love wasn't about guarantees or certainty or finding someone perfect. It was about finding someone willing to struggle through imperfection with you, about choosing each other every day even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. It was about building something together that neither person could build alone. The ranch continued to grow and change. More horses, better facilities, a reputation that spread beyond Montana territory. But the real growth was harder to measure. The way Caleb learned to listen instead of command. The way Clara learned to speak up instead of shrink down. The way they built a life that belonged to both of them equally. Marcus retired after 7 years, settling in Helena with enough money saved to buy a small place of his own. Tommy took over as foreman and proved even better at it than Marcus had been. New hands came and went, but the core remained. People who understood that the Granger Ranch wasn't just about cattle or horses or money. It was about what you could build when you stopped trying to do everything alone. Sometimes, late at night, when Emma was asleep and the house was quiet, Caleb and Clara would sit in the office, the one she'd reorganized over his protests, the one that now held both their paperwork in perfect order, and talk about the future. Not big dramatic plans, just the small daily things that added up to a life. "Think we should expand the south barn?" Clara would ask. "Depends. You think we need the space?" "Might, if we get that breeding pair from Wyoming Tommy's been talking about." "Then we probably should. Want to look at the numbers tomorrow?" "Yeah, after we check on Emma." After we check on Emma. These conversations weren't romantic or profound. They were just two people planning their shared future with the kind of casual certainty that came from knowing they'd both chosen this and would keep choosing it. Years passed. Emma grew. The ranch prospered. Caleb's hair went gray at the temples, and Clara developed laugh lines around her eyes from smiling more than she frowned. They fought and made up and fought again, and learned that conflict wasn't failure. It was just two people caring enough to disagree honestly. On their 10th anniversary, standing in the garden that Clara had turned from empty dirt into something remarkable, Caleb looked at his wife. Older now, worn by weather and work and motherhood, beautiful in ways that had nothing to do with polish, and thought about the man he'd been when she arrived. That man had been convinced he was better off alone. Convinced that walls meant strength and isolation meant safety. Convinced that love was just a transaction that always ended in abandonment. He'd been wrong about everything. "What are you thinking about?" Clara asked, catching him staring. "How different everything is." "Better different or worse different?" "Better. Definitely better." He pulled her close. "You know what I learned?" "What?" "That the strongest things we build aren't the ones we build alone. They're the ones we build with someone willing to share the weight." Clara smiled, the real smile that still made his chest tight after 10 years. "When did you get so wise?" "I married a smart woman. Some of it rubbed off." She kissed him there in the garden, surrounded by the flowers she'd planted and the vegetables that would feed them through winter and the life they'd grown together from nothing. And Caleb thought about the 20 women he'd rejected, about Sarah and Robert and all the ghosts he'd carried, about the fortress he'd built to keep everyone out. All of it had been necessary. All of it had led him here. To this woman, this life, this understanding that survival meant nothing if you had to survive alone. The ranch that had once been his empire was now their home. The house that had been a monument to loss was now filled with love and laughter and the beautiful mess of actually living. And the man who'd been too proud to accept help had learned, slowly, painfully, but completely, that asking for help wasn't weakness. It was the bravest thing you could do. Emma called from the house, needing something, and Clara pulled away with a laugh. Duty calls. Want help? Always. They walked back together, hand in hand, and Caleb understood that this was what happiness looked like. Not perfect, not easy, just two imperfect people choosing each other every single day and building something real from that choice. Behind them, the garden bloomed in the Montana summer, proof that even the hardest ground could grow something beautiful if you were willing to work for it. And in the mountains beyond, a storm was building, because this was Montana, and there was always another storm coming. But this time, Caleb wasn't facing it alone. This time, he had Clara beside him, and a daughter, sleeping safe inside, and a ranch full of people who'd become family. This time he had everything he'd spent 11 years convinced he didn't need, and it was more than enough. It was everything.